full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Actiones nostras quesibus Domini sperando proveni, vivando prosequere, ut contra nostra operatio et semper incipiate per te cepta teniamur, per Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen. Amen. Our Lady, Mother and Queen of the Eucharist, pray for us, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. So we'll just get started. I'm going to give a basic introduction, which will probably eat up a little bit of time. Meanwhile, Father's trying to figure out how to get the PowerPoint set up, because I have an adapter, but I bought the cheapest adapter I could find, and it doesn't work. So we'll have to see if he can get the PowerPoint set up. There are pieces of paper. I don't know, Curtis, did you send those around, the piece of paper? Well, this is just everybody's so far away, but questions are always very good. So if there's questions that you have at any point in time, you can ask those. Sometimes that guides. If I just go on talking about something and nobody understands what I'm saying, I realize there's not a foundation that's there just yet. And sometimes questions really help lay that foundation. So if you do have questions along the way, you can ask. I was thinking if there were too many people, if questions don't work out all that well, then we could just write them down. You could ask me at the end of what we'll do is we'll break each talk into 2 segments so that we can have a break halfway through. And at the end of the first segment, maybe 30 minutes, we'll stop for questions. So if you have any questions, that's a good time. I've always found that the questions are really very instrumental, and especially when it comes to liturgy, because everybody has a different understanding of liturgy and different, different things that they've seen or that they're concerned with or that they don't fully understand just yet. So the questions really help kind of bring everybody onto an equal kind of. So basically, this will be an 11-week course, is what we're going to strive for. We'll start at the beginning, meaning we need to start with kind of the dogmatic and ascetical elements before we move into the liturgical and more theological elements, if that makes sense. So instead of jumping right into, this is what we're doing at Mass when we do this and this and this, first we need to kind of dispose ourselves, just like we need to dispose ourselves for Mass, we need to dispose ourselves for what Mass is. So the intention for the first part, maybe the first couple of talks, will be understanding kind of the essentials of what leads us to having Mass. Why do we even have Mass? Why did our Lord give us the Mass? What purpose does it serve in our lives? And to do that, we have to go backwards. We have to keep going backwards to build a foundation for understanding. After 2,000 years of Catholicism, we sometimes lose track of what we're doing when we go to Mass. We lose track of where it even came from. And then with some of the liturgical changes that have happened in more recent times, we get a kind of a looser idea of what liturgy is in and of itself. That is divine worship, what divine worship is, and what our responsibility to responding to that divine worship is. That may not make a lot of sense just yet. It doesn't have to. When we start talking about, when Father gets it, if he's able to get it up, we'll start chomping through that today. But
in just a sec, yeah. I was just saying, it is coming.
So what I won't be talking about, more of the historical sacramentaries. I don't know if you know what a sacrament is. We talk about the Roman Missal. The Missal, we always hear about the Missal now, or the lectionary. Before, when we go all the way back, we can't find where the Mass started. We know where it started. It started, and probably next week, that's what we'll talk about. We'll really kind of we'll track down from the earliest writings and the fathers of the Church, kind of where the liturgy comes from. But we're not going to look at these sacramentaries, meaning the oldest writings we have that show us what the liturgy was. And those oldest writings we have, like the first sacramentaries that we find, are the 300s. That doesn't mean they first started the Mass in the 300s. It means we don't have the books before that, because those were old. But what we have is probably a faithful reproduction of what they've been doing already for hundreds of years. Those sacramentaries they weren't like missals like we have today. They had things that the missals have in them, but having the entire Mass in one book, that isn't something that they necessarily had before. What they had were many different books that did different things. They had very complicated liturgy. They had their different books for those liturgies. For the Roman Missal, we put it all into one. We now have printing presses and everything else. We were able to do that. So we're not going to be talking about the different sacramentaries. They may pop up, but it's not the most interesting stuff in the world. So some of the more kind of historical elements on how the Mass got built, we're not going to be you can ask questions about it, but it's not something we're going to focus too much on. The purpose here is going to be, like I just kind of mentioned, we're going to build a foundation based on the essence of the Mass, where it comes from, more kind of theologically, dogmatically, and ascetically, and then we're going to move into liturgically, what are we doing and how does all that come about? We know that our Lord, or at least if we look at the Roman Rite and how it's been brought down to us, we talk about something called organic development. Pope Benedict, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, used to refer to it as the hermeneutics of continuity. That's something that affected the reforms after Vatican II. There was a rupture with that hermeneutics, that organic development stopped, and then something else was formed. We will talk about that because it greatly affects our way, especially us, this modern day man, our ability to understand what liturgy is and what God intends from that liturgy. So we'll be looking at kind of these essential elements of liturgy, and because we're looking at the Roman Rite, that's the other thing. We're not going to talk about other liturgies. I'm not going to talk to you about Greek Orthodox stuff or the different rites like in Milan or in Spain. We're not going to go into all the different rites because they don't affect us really. At least for me, they never interested me one bit because I'm Roman. And the Roman Rite is probably, in all honesty, the most ancient form of the Mass. It's the most austere form of the Mass. And its austerity is its beauty, if that makes any sense. The austerity of the Roman Rite is its beauty. When I say austerity, what I'm talking about is we're not looking at like those sacramentaries that I talked about. When the French got a hold of those sacramentaries right after they were written in Rome, the French would get a hold of them, not to offend anybody who has French, but then they would take those sacramentaries back to France and immediately start to change them. The culture there, from the beginning, has always been one that needs to put more into it. That's not to slam their culture, but it's not Roman. So it became its own Gallican Rite. In the 1850s, or somewhere around there, during the lifetime of the Cure of Ars, they had actually embraced only the Roman Rite. But since then, the Roman Rite, they've added all these kind of customs in there. My job as a friar, for a few years ago, I had to travel around and teach people Latin Mass. And everywhere I went, I had to teach the servers, and I had to help the priests learn, kind of get away from some of the errors that had happened when they're starting to use the old Mass. They were so used to a different way, and so you kind of had to get people up to speed. But I started finding all these things that we call customs. A custom is a liturgical practice that happens in a particular area due to the particular piety of a particular people. And it isn't always bad. It's a thing for particular people in a particular place. But what we see is a lot of the videos that were made when the old Mass started coming out, and they were making videos for it to show, to start teaching this to people again. They had all these practices, all these customs that were from France. So everybody was doing all these, they were ringing bells at funny times, they were flipping chalice veils around and just kind of bringing, they were just doing strange stuff. For a normal, for somebody from Rome, it was kind of a strange, I say Rome, we Americans follow a strict Roman rite. And in Rome, they should follow a strict Roman rite, but really they don't either. There's all these customs that came from France. So when France took on the missal in the 1850s, they immediately started to put their customs into it. We'll get into a lot of that stuff when we start talking about the liturgical aspect of liturgy. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. So, any questions before we start? I didn't think you would have any questions, but I just thought I'd ask, just in case, because sometimes people have a question that just can't wait. Sometimes it's a good one. So, how are we close, Father?
Well, it's still installing your office, so
Well, if I can
maybe for the first part, if you
I can just
if you
walk
want
with
to
it.
just use it up here, and then maybe for the second part I'll have it so we'll have it on the screen.
All right.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. So it's not up here. I just got to bring it up again. Apostolate. There you go. Okay. So I have a PowerPoint presentation, which I don't like PowerPoint presentations, but I wasn't sure before coming exactly what would be the best way to do the catechism class. I don't like being so far away either, so maybe in the future we might do it a different way. I'm not sure. Maybe we'll have even catechism a little bit different than the way we're doing it now, but I'll follow through and we'll just talk about how to move forward. The first slide on here, which you can't see, I'll just name off a couple of books. So if you are taking notes and you're interested in some of these books, they're not the only resources that I'm using for the course, but they're probably the primary ones. First and foremost, there's a book. It's an excellent book, and you can get it free online. It's called The Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, Dogmatically, Liturgically, and Ascetically Explained by Nicholas Geer. He's actually a German. He's one of those great German Jesuits. They just wrote all kinds of books in the early 1900s about wonderful stuff. So it's The Holy Sacrifice of the Mass by Nicholas Geer. And the way you spell Geer is G-I-H-R. G-I-H-R. Then the second one will be from Adrian Fortescue. Anybody who knows much about, serving liturgy and stuff, everybody knows about Adrian Fortescue, a good English priest who he died in 1918, I think, and but he wrote a couple of ceremonials, and he was a really intelligent Roman priest, but he was just a parish priest, and he only wrote these books mostly because he was trying to raise money for his parish. He had a poor parish. I'll just tell you a quick funny story about him so you can be endeared to this holy priest. Once he got called to the diocese, because in most dioceses sometimes you get priests that don't take the opportunity to study, and so the diocese gets a little distraught because they have some priests in their diocese that aren't studying as much as they should, and so they're not as equipped to theologically as they should be maybe. So they called all the priests in and had them take kind of this quiz, and they asked them some questions and then they write everything down. Adrian Fortescue was very mad about the whole thing, and he went in there and they asked him, write everything you know about such and such a topic. So he packed a lunch with him, and he sat there and he just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and then he went up. He had several doctorates, I think, I don't know. He kept going up and asking for more paper, and he sat down and kept writing and writing. All the other priests had left, and Adrian Fortescue, Father Fortescue, still sitting there writing and writing and writing. Then finally, the proctor of the exams getting a bit impatient, and then Father Fortescue pulls out a sandwich. He starts eating the sandwich. He keeps writing and writing and writing and writing. And then finally, he takes it up there after a couple hours, or a few hours, and the proctor of the exam finally says, "Could I just ask why it took you so long?" "Well, you said to write everything that I knew." down. So he was writing everything that he knew on whatever topic that was. He just kept writing. So he wrote a nice book called The Mass. And it's a simple little book. He's really pulling references from a lot of different people. But the nice thing about it is it's you have all the references right there. That's a small book. And you can get that one. I just downloaded that from Forgotten Books. And I just printed it myself and bound it. So you can get it out there for free. The Mass, but they also sell it. I think if you do a Google search for it, you'll find somebody that's binding and selling that again. So it's a study of the Roman liturgy, The Mass, Study of the Roman Liturgy by Adrian Fortescue. Then there's the Roman Catechism. That's a very important, very excellent catechism that very precisely says certain things, and so it's easy to use. And also it was written right after there were many liturgical abuses. And right after the formation, we'll talk about this later, of the Roman Rite, where the Roman Rite became the exclusive rite for Roman Rite Catholics, whereas before that wasn't the case. Every diocese had basically its own liturgy, in essence. And that's when they consolidated that missal. And I'll say it and I'll explain it later, thanks to the Franciscans. You may not understand that, but you'll understand it later. I'll explain it later. Then the manual, Manuale di Storia di Liturgia, you're not going to need that, but it's unless you speak Italian. If you speak Italian, come talk to me about it. It's a 4-volume series. It's a whole history of the liturgy. Excellent. It's an excellent history of the liturgy. There's two volumes or 2 versions. They did one after Vatican II, and it says in the light of Vatican II, and then they have one that was done in the 1940s. I compared the two, and the one done in the light of Vatican II, it says things in there liturgically that just don't add up. That in the book before that he said didn't exist, and then after that he said did exist. It doesn't seem like an honest work, the updating that he did, and I'm not sure why he did it. But anyways, if you are interested in that one, let me know. It's by Righetti. The last name's enough. It's R-I-G, where's that? Righetti. Rigetti. History of Liturgy, Righetti. Manuale di Storia di Liturgia, Righetti. And then the Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma by Ludwig Ott. A lot of you have heard of him. I think you can download that free online as well. The book of Ludwig Ott. It's an excellent book with just cram-packed full of all these doctrinal things. But he goes through basically the fundamentals of theology, which would be redemption, who Christ is, the subjective redemption. He goes through all these, and the Mass and the sacraments, whatever, and he brings you basically explains it all. But the citations in there are priceless, so that I use that quite often. And then the Spirit of the Liturgy, I'll reference a few times by Cardinal Ratzinger. There's also other manuals. There's other manuals I'll be using.
It's always something, sorry.
There's other manuals I'll be using that are on spiritual theology. So I didn't cite those because I ran out of room on the slide, and I didn't want to make another slide that just had a couple things on it. So anyways, you can't see the slide anyway, so don't worry about it. If you're interested in those manuals on spiritual theology, ask me about it, and I'll just tell you individually. I already mentioned a little bit, but the scope of the course, it isn't to give you an entire background in the liturgy, because it's only 11 weeks. I mean, I'm going to have to cut out a ton of stuff. Some things I'll probably give you too much information. Some things I won't give you much. The first part is interesting, but it could feel a little heady. But if you can get through it, it will lay a foundation for you that is supposed to help you better understand how to pray the Mass. The reason why we participate in Mass. At Mass, at every sacrament, there's a difference between kind of objective graces and subjective graces. They call it the ex opere operato and the ex opere operantis. These are terms that basically mean the grace that's worked in you by God that makes you holy in a sacrament, and the grace that you subjectively have to be open to in order to be sanctified even more. And what you'll hear me refer to that as is being disposed to receiving grace, disposition. The first part you could say that we're going to talk about in the liturgy we need to dispose ourselves to understanding the profundity of what God has given us in the Mass by examining what is the virtue of religion. Sounds a bit strange, but we're going to look at the virtue of religion. And that'll take us right into preparing for the Mass. Then we'll talk about what that is from the redemption wrought by Christ, what that meant in that sacrifice, how is the Mass a sacrifice, and then from there we'll start getting into the Mass and its individual particular elements, if that makes sense. All right. So I wrote on here that you can't see, but it's basically the scope is for the maximum love of God, His honor and His glory. Now, honor and glory of God, that is worship, and that's what we'll look at right now. So, Holy Mass is Catholic worship.